The Clockmaker's Garden. Once upon a time, in the quiet village of Larkspur Hollow, nestled between bluebell-covered hills and whispering trees, there lived an old clockmaker named Eliot. He had soft, silvery hair like the underside of a moonflower, and fingers that moved as delicately as hummingbird wings. Though Eliot had spent most of his life fixing clocks, grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, pocket watches, and sundials, he had a secret. He didn't care much for time. His shop sat at the very end of Wren Street, where no carriages passed and birds sang uninterrupted. The windows were always fogged just a bit from the kettle on the stove, and the air inside always smelled like tea leaves and cedar shavings. The village children often peeked in, hoping to see something magical happen between the gears and springs. Eliot never chased them off. He liked that they believed something mysterious might tick behind his curtains. Every evening, after winding the last clock and sipping the last of his honeyed tea, Eliot stepped out into his garden. Now, this was no ordinary garden. There were no neat rows or obedient hedges. The plants here grew according to their own dreams. There were tulips that opened at night instead of morning, moonfruit vines that glowed with a gentle silver light, and sleepy violets that hummed when the wind passed through. A small, quiet pond sat near the center, perfectly round, like the face of a watch, and the frogs living inside only croaked at 1/4 every hour. Eliot had tended this garden for over 40 years, but he never planted anything. He just listened and watered and waited, because every spring something new would grow on its own. One year it was a bush that bore keys instead of berries, tiny bronze ones that jingled in the breeze. Another year, a row of feathered lilies sprouted, their petals patterned like owl wings. The next year, the garden grew a tree whose bark smelled faintly of cinnamon and whose leaves whispered names in languages no one had spoken in centuries. Eliot never asked why. He simply took care of them. Now, just as this story begins, something unusual happened. On the first day of spring, Eliot woke up to find a ticking sound coming from the garden, not from his shop, where clocks lined every wall, but from the earth outside. Intrigued, he stepped outside in his slippers and followed the tick-tick-ticking until he stood before a new sprout no taller than his thumb, pushing out of the mossy soil near the pond. It wasn't green, like most sprouts. It was copper, and it ticked. Eliot tilted his head. The tick was soft, like a heartbeat muffled through a woolen coat, but steady and clear. He leaned down, brushed the soil away gently, and saw a slender stem spiraling like the hand of a clock. That night, and for many nights to follow, Eliot watched the strange plant grow. By the end of the first week, it had unfurled delicate leaves shaped like gears. Tiny flower buds peeked out, shaped like winding keys. Each petal ticked in rhythm, though none opened yet. The children at the window stopped peeking into the shop. Instead, they crept along the garden fence, whispering rumors that Mr. Eliot had grown a timeflower. By midsummer, the flower had bloomed. It stood waist-high now, with bronze petals and a golden center that shimmered like sunlight in a raindrop. The ticking had grown louder, not disruptive, but impossible to ignore. It chimed every hour, on the hour, with a soft tone that echoed like a bell in a deep valley. One night, under a sky heavy with stars, Eliot sat beside the flower and asked it the question he'd always avoided. Why do you tick? The flower didn't answer, of course, but the pond rippled, the air shifted, and Eliot felt the answer settle somewhere in his bones. The next morning, he made a decision. He closed the shop. He didn't sell the clocks. He didn't give them away. He simply stopped winding them. One by one, they slowed and stopped. Larkspur Hollow noticed. The town square clock tower skipped its noon chime. The baker forgot to pull his loaves at the usual time. The children no longer knew exactly when they had to be home. And yet, no one minded. They began listening to the birds, watching the shadows, eating when they were hungry, sleeping when they were tired. Time, it turned out, was not a thing they needed keeping. As for Eliot, he began tending to his garden full-time, not just because the Timeflower had bloomed, but because something had begun to happen beneath it. Tiny seeds were dropping, not falling, dropping, as if placed with purpose. Each one looked like a pearl, soft and glowing. He gathered them in a jar, unsure what to do with them, until one evening a knock came at his door. It was the girl from the bakery, Mira her name was, holding a small pot of soil in her hands. "Do you have any seeds left?" she asked. Eliot smiled, handed her one, and said only, "Don't plant it unless you're ready to stop checking the hour." Mira blinked, nodded, and left. One by one, villagers came, some curious, some longing, some who didn't even know why they'd walked that far. Eliot gave each of them a seed, and one by one, gardens began blooming all over Larkspur Hollow. Not all of them ticked. Some sang. Some chimed like glasses in the wind. Some were utterly silent, but made dreams come faster when you slept beside them. The world outside the hollow kept spinning, of course. Clocks still ticked elsewhere, but inside that little village, something had changed. People woke when the light touched their eyelids. They cooked when the scent of herbs filled the air. They met on porches, under trees, near pond banks, and told stories not in hours or minutes, but in moments. And Eliot, the old clockmaker, sat in his garden each night, listening not to ticking, but to growing, and to the sound of the world slowing down just enough to notice itself. And so it was that in a village once ruled by time, time began to bloom instead. The end.